we're looking at the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Beis. And the Mishnah differentiates in between two cases of Barach. There's Barach before the Gemar Din, and there's Barach after the Gemar Din. In both cases, there was Eidus of Zolel V'Sove, and he was in that window of time of his maturity after Shtei Saras, in which he was a candidate for being condemned as a Ben Soromor, and he would be put to death by Skila. The only thing is, we couldn't get a hold of him. He flew the coop. So the Mishnah says the following: if it was Barach Achlo Nigmar Dino, the Achach Hikif Zokan Atachton Potter. If he got away before the Gemar Din, and now by the time we get hold of him and we want to now condemn him to death with the Gemar Din, he's already reached the stage in which he's too old to be condemned as a Ben Soromor because it's Hikif HaZakan. So in such a case, Potter. And we'll see Rashi in a minute. Ooh. Nice. Thank you for the tea. Okay. Hot water, yeah. But the Mishnigmar Dino Barach, so he was already condemned to death in Bezdin. V'akach he gives Zokan Atachton Chayev. Rashi reveals the inner meaning and the underlying reasoning in the Reisha by telling us something about the Seifa. And he says that in the Seifa, he is not within the purview of Vitzilu Ha'eda. Why? Because Vitzilu Ha'eda only applies before the Gemar Din. But once there's a Gemar Din, he's called a Bar Ketola, he's been condemned to death, and there's no longer Vitzilu, Rashi says. So implying that in the Reisha, we're going to activate the principle of Vitzilu. Now let's make 2 points over here. Point number one is that at first glance, we don't understand why Rashi needs Vitzilu. After all, he flew the coop before the Gemar Din, and now he is he's right now after Hikif HaZakan, and he's no longer a candidate to be a Ben Soromora. So what would you say? Can we condemn him based on the edus that was the evidence that was originally accepted, when now he's no longer in the parsha of Ben Soromora? He's already Hikif HaZakan. So Rashi says we have to come up with some svara to pater him. In other words, the ptur in our Reisha is not intuitive. It's not something that we would understand on our own. The mitzvah of Vitzilas Ha'eda commands Bezdin to come up with some argument, some possible taina that would exempt the accused from the death penalty. Even if that taina is not so convincing, even if that taina is a bit dachuk, it's something that we really have to push in, and it's not readily obvious. Nevertheless, that's what Bezdin is required to do. Come up with some far-fetched logical or not so logical argument. And the Gemara is going to tell us that this Mishnah is a support for Rabbi Chanina, who has a principle called Hol V'Ishtene Ishtene, that once his situation has changed and the dinim have changed because he went through a change, then we no longer apply the original punishment that would be imposed upon him, because Ishtene. And Rashi is basically implying that Ishtene is not really a convincing argument, but it does fit under the perspective of what? Vitzilu. And we're going to apply the principle of Hol V'Ishtene. Now, what's the Ishtene here? Let's just go through this. The Ishtene here is in the status of the person, meaning before he was Boreach, when he was standing in judgment, he was a Gavra who was within the purview of becoming a Ben Soromor. We could have condemned him as Ben Soromor. It was before Hikif HaZakan. But now, today, it's Ishtene. What's Ishtene mean? His dinim are no longer the same. He's after what? After Hikif HaZakan, he's no longer in the parsha of Ben Soromor. So that Ishtene is going to create a ptur. Now, there are really two ways of understanding this Mishnah, the Reisha of of Barach Kodem Shenigmar Dina. One is to say that he's potter. Why is he potter? Because of Holva Ishtere, even though it's not a very convincing argument, because he was guilty as accused of the crimes of Ben Soromora when he was a candidate for Ben Soromora. So why can't we be Gomer as Dino just because the clock is ticked and he's no longer in the Parsha Ben Soromora, he's already after Hikim. So we really don't have such a convincing argument, and then we're going to have to say that some sort of new din of Holva Ishtene. When I say a din, what I mean to say by that is that it's a ptur. There's a new ptur. You have different reasons why a person could be patur. You might have, for example, a case of a ptur because of a technicality or because he didn't get asra. There are many. The Gemara even has in Bacchus a case where the two Eidim saw from two different vantage points, and therefore the Rotzech, even though we're absolutely sure that he killed someone, he's patur. So there are halachic considerations, what we would call legal considerations, why we can let him off the hook. And this might be one of them, that Hol ve'ishtene, he's no longer in the same situation that he was before. But tonight, I think we want to prove another approach here. And that is the approach of Tosfos. It's not some sort of p'tur. He's really chayav misa. There's no question he's chayav misa. The problem is that we cannot implement that chayav misa. We cannot be makayim the chayav misa. Again, not like the first approach where there's some sort of halachic p'tur, but rather I'm going to admit to you that he's chayav. There's no question he should be put to death for those crimes that he implemented when he was in the Parsha Ben Soromora and he was royal Lakach. But despite the fact that he's chayav misa, the hands of Beis Din are tied and they cannot implement the chayav misa. And the reason for that is because today we have to condemn him to death. And today he's no longer Ben Soromora. So what we want to do now is to analyze the Gemara's equation between our Mishnah, the analogy to Rabbi Chanina. So let's learn Rabbi Chanina. Amar Rabbi Chanina. Ben Noach shebirech es Hashem v'achar kach nisgayel. So let's understand what goes on here. Birech es Hashem, which is otherwise called Makalel, is one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And what's common to all Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach? Chayav misa, and more than that, what chayav misa? Sayif. So had we been able to put this man to death as he was a ben Noach, he would have been chayav sayif for the Iser of Birchas Hashem. But now he's this guy. And guess what? A Jew, chas v'shalom, who's guilty of this same crime, he's chayav a different misa. Which misa is he chayav? Skila. He's chayav skila. Now, which is more chamor, sayif or skila? Skila. Skila is more chamor, and sayif relative to skila is kal. Comes along Rabbi Chanina, and he says potter. And why is he potter? Hol v'nishtana dino v'nishtana misasa. In other words, nishtana dino means that his status has changed. He's now a Yisrael. And the dinim that apply to a Yisrael are different than those that apply to a Ben Noach. So whereas as a Ben Noach for this Avera, he would be chayav sayif, as a ger, as a Yisrael, he's chayav skila. So that's called the Nishtana Dino. And as a result of Nishtana Dino, meaning his status has changed, he's now a Yisrael and not a Ben Noach, is Memela Nishtana Misasa, which means that we don't implement a Chiyav Misa of Sayif. Sayif would be letting him off the hook too easy, whereas he's, as a ger, he deserves which Misa? The Misa of Skila, Misa Chamura. So this really could be understood in the light of what they call a Chiv Misa, but we cannot implement the Chiv Misa. Why? Because we want to. If you want to judge him as a Ben Noach, well, I got news for you. He's not a Ben Noach. So you cannot implement the Misa of a Ben Noach, namely Sayef. But you have another choice. Well, let's condemn him as he is today, and then it will be Chayv what? Skila. But the only problem is, since Skila is more Chomer than Sayef, when he did the Avera, when he implemented the crime, the maximum Misa that we could have given him would have been Sayef. And now you can impose a Misa that's more Chomer on him for an Avera that he committed when he was Ben Noach, and not when he committed as a Yisrael after Geras. Do you follow what I'm saying over here? It's not the way I suggested it before, that there's some sort of halachic tour, there's some sort of like reasoning or rule that generates a tour. No, that's not what we're saying over here. We're saying that this individual, although he deserves to die, whether it's with Sayef or with Skila, one way or the other, he should be condemned to death for the Avera of Birkas Hashem, but we don't know how to implement that. Our hands are tied. He like falls between the cracks. We can't give him Sayef because he's no longer Ben Noach. We can't give him Skila because he committed the crime when he was a Ben Noach, and he wouldn't have deserved at that point when he committed the crime the Misa Chamura of Skila.
Is the defect in the Hasra as well? Because if you give Hasra to someone, let's say for extradition, you say the wrong thing, you say Streifer instead of Saif or whatever. Would that also be a problem sometimes?
Again, it depends which side of the coin you're on. If you're on the side of the coin that we should condemn him as a Ben Noach, a Ben Noach is put to death without Asra.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's called Asra. The din is called Asra.
Right. So I'm just saying,
it's still a type of Asra.
We don't have to tell him you're going to be Chayv Sayef.
No, you don't have to. It's still a type of Asra.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just saying, your scenario would be when you didn't give him Asra, you were supposed to give him Asra, but in this case, or in worse, not only did you give him Asra, you gave him the wrong Asra, but in the case of Ben Noach, Asra is irrelevant. Now, if you're talking about putting him to death as a Yisrael, because today he's already a Ger, then there are many things that are missing here. Number one, he was condemned as with one dying. Number two, he was condemned with one aid. And number three, he was condemned without Asra. So the din of Ben Noach changed completely. So that again supports the Mimanavshak that we were suggesting. Because today we can't condemn to death as a Sayef, with Sayef, even though all the conditions have been met. We have the Eid Echad, we have the Dayan Echad, we don't need Asra. We should be putting him to death. We had all the evidence and everything is set. He should be condemned to death. There's only one problem. He's the Yisrael today. So we can't give him that Misa. Well, let's give him the Misa as the Yisrael. We got many problems with that. Number one, there was only one aid. Number two, there was only one Dayan. Number three, there was no Asra. Number four, he should be Chayv Skila as in Yisrael, and that would be more Chomer than the Chiv that he would have incurred as a Ben Noach. Again, Rabosa, as I asked you last time, if there's any way, we could sit somewhere, in the middle. I'll tell you why. It's very troublesome for me to have to go back and forth, right and left. All right, I tried.
So
it was not very successful.
We don't really like each other.
So this is social distance.
So despite had the din been reversed, that it was Skila for Ben Noach and Sayef for Israel.
That's going to be the next sugi.
That's the next sugi.
The next sugi is going to be, what if, as a Yisrael, we would go down one level instead of going up to a more severe visa, we would go down to a less severe visa. That's going to be the mitzvah Shem, the next sugi. So again, just to summarize, we were trying to figure out if this halacha of hoil ve'ishtene is some sort of a p'tur, some reason which we don't know exactly. It's one of those technical reasons why he's potter, or no, he's chayav, but just we don't know how to implement the misa because he fits or falls, shall we say, between the cracks. Those were the two possibilities. Okay. Now we go on, and the Gemara says the following: Nema Misayel. Can we support Rabbi Chanina's principle of whole ve'ishtene from our Mishnah? And again, in our Mishnah also, there's a whole ve'ishtene, because what's his status today? It's hikif hazakon, and therefore he's potter. In the new status, he's out of the parish of what? Of Ben Sora Mora. So the Gemara is almost compelled to set up an analogy between our Mishnah and Rabbi Chanina. Why? Because Baruch Hashlo Nigmar Dino v'achkach hikev hazakon atachton potter. My timer. Why is he potter? Because isn't it la mishum de amrin and hol ve'ishtene ishtene? His dinim have changed. He's now in a situation of hikif hazakon. What are we going to do now? We're going to implement the Gemar din that he was worthy of before hikif hazakon. He's not around anymore, so to speak. He's gone. That personality who would be subject to condemnation to a Gemar din in Bezdin no longer exists, so to speak. It's history. And at that point, we have a beautiful analogy to Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina is saying, well, he once was a Ben Noach, and he once was condemned in front of one judge with one aid and without Asra. Fine, he was condemned to Saif, but you can't implement Saif because Ishtane, he's no longer what? He's no longer a Ben Noach. And as Israel, we have a whole different system. And the Gemara rejects it. Lo. Shiny Hacha. Our Mishnah is different because the Ovid Hashta La Bar Ktolu. You see, Rabbi Chanina, according to the Gemara's rejection, is making a leap of faith. He's going way beyond our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is saying that we cannot condemn this Ben Soromor to death today because today he would never be guilty of being a Ben Soromor. So how can you put him to death for a crime which, if he would implement today, he would not be chayav? He would be totally vindicated. He's after hikif hazakon. But that doesn't prove a thing about a Ben Noach, because in both cases, whether he's a Ben Noach or he's a ger, he is chayav misa. And the Gemara now at this point is going to ask Rabbi Chanina the following question. So why do you say hol vishtane ishtane? After all, he's always chayav misa, whether he was mevarchas Hashem before his gerus or after his gerus. And Rabbi Chanina is going to come up with this radical chiddush that which misa are we going to give him? We can't give this misa, we can't give him that misa. But that's not the same as saying, well, if he implemented the Birchas Hashem today after Gerus, he would not be Chayav Misa. He certainly would be Chayav Misa. On the contrary, be Chayav even a Misa Chamura. So how do you patter him up just because of whole Vishtane? And the answer is, according to Rashi at least, Vitzilu Ha'eda. Vitzilu Ha'eda gives me this new din that he's pater because we can't condemn him now because he's Israel, and Israel has a different system. Or as we said before, and now I think we can drop the ball on Vitzilu Ha'eda. We don't need the Rashi. Even without the Rashi, we could just say Bimanav Shav. We don't have any possibility neither of Saif nor of Skilu. So the Havamid of the Gemara and the Maskana of the Gemara are really fighting about the following. Is whole Ishne simply the fact that he's changed his status? Or whole Ishne is because he would no longer be guilty and condemnable, if there's such a word, for that same crime? If it's the latter, then you have no proof to Rabbi Chanina, because Rabbi Chanina's case is such that he's still condemnable for that crime. So Rabbi Chanina is telling me something totally different. This new principle that he's revolutionizing, namely of whole Vishnei Ishtane. That's not what you saw in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah is saying, can you put someone to death today when today he would not be guilty of that crime? And the Mishnah says no. But that doesn't prove anything about Rabbi Chanina, where as a ger, he would be put to death for that same crime. Good? I'm excited because I worked very hard on this. It's a really challenging Gemara. Unfortunately, it doesn't get any easier. Toshma. The Gemara now wants to reject Rabbi Chanina. Why? Let's go back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah has a sefer. If Mishnah nigmar dino barach v'achkach hikiv zokan atachton chayav. Now wait a second. there's something very strange going on in this Mishnah. Because at this point, when we want to put him to death, he is no longer capable of being guilty of that crime. Correct? Because it's after Hikim Hazaka. And yet we're going to put him to death, says the Mishnah, because there was a Gemara Din before he reached the stage of Hikim Hazaka. But wait a second. According to you, Rabbi Chanina, we have a principle called Hol ve'ishtene ishtene. And if ishtene means that we cannot condemn him today, like for example, in the case of a Benoch Shabirch Hashem Yachach Nisgayer, we cannot condemn him today for Saif, because Saif is not an appropriate punishment for a ger, for Yisrael. So what kind of punishment would be appropriate after Hikif Hazakon? And the Gemara answers, you know what? This is not a contradiction to Rabbi Chanina. Nigmar Dino Kama. Nigmar Dino is a whole different halacha. We're not talking about putting him to death today after Hikif Hazakon, as if he would have committed that crime today. We don't have to put him to death. He's already a dead man because it's after Gemara Din. So the Havamina, the Gemara was totally oblivious to this halacha that after Gemara Din Lamisa, you have a status of what? Of a Gavbar Katola. And being oblivious to that, the Gemara says, well, wait a minute. Today, if he did the crime, you could not possibly condemn him to death. He's after Hikiv Hazakah. So how could the Mishnah say that Baruch Yachkach Hikiv, that we put him to death, he's chayav? In the light of Rabbi Chanina's whole ve'ishtene, and we're trying desperately to see if we can, we're measuring and evaluating, can we implement the Misa of today? And the answer is we cannot implement the Misa of today for that crime, because that crime today, says Rabbi Chanina, would generate skila and not what? And not sayif. Oh, if that be the case, then if you're focused on implementing the crime, implementing the punishment for the crime today, then in the case of Hikif HaZakan, I don't care if he was Boreach after Gemar Din, that makes no difference. According to Rabbi Chanina, you want to judge and determine whether we could be condemning him today for that crime. With that Misa, the answer is no, and therefore he's off the hook. Well, what about Barach? Even if it's after Gemar Din, he's already in a new situation. It's already Hikif HaZakan, and there's no way that you can implement that Misa after Hikif HaZakan. The Gemara says, but you're missing one principle. And that principle that fell somehow beyond you, you ignored it, is the principle of Gavra Ketila. You're missing the point here. We're not going to condemn him to death. If we're going to condemn him to death today, you're right. Hol v'ishtene yishtene. We can't condemn him to death. He's after Hikif HaZakan. But the answer is, we don't have to condemn him to death. All we have to do is implement the death penalty. He's already a Gavra Ketila. So the Gemara now has another kasha on Rabbi Chanina from another verse. Yeah.
Can we infer from this that in the case of the ger with Chanina, that there was no Gemar Din?
Correct.
Because if there were a Gemar Din as when he was still a guy,
yeah, that's absolutely.
Then he's also back.
Yeah, that's also about it. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're Ben Noach or Ben Yisrael. If you're condemned, you're a Gavra Ketila, and then we just have to implement the death penalty.
Okay.
Good point. Toshma. Now we're going to ask a kasha from a brisa. Okay, Rabosa. I'm going to say Shira Malas here. Okay. Okay. Ben Noach Shehika es chaveru. That's a euphemism, so to speak, for murder. So what does chaveru mean? Obviously, it's not his best friend, but it's another Ben Noach. So this is the case of one Ben Noach who murdered another Ben Noach. Correct? And what's going to be the Misa, as always, for Ben Noach, for any of the seven side? Another case. Ben Noach, I'm adding 2 words here. Ben Noach sheba al eshes chavera. Also one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. And what's going to be his Misa as a Ben Noach? Once again, side. So it's pretty boring, but it's easy. Any violation of a Ben Noach of any of the Sheva mitzvahs generates side. Then V'nizgayah. Okay, V'nizgayah. What? So far, so good. I understand why he's potter according to Rabbi Chanina. So this is not a kasha on Rabbi Chanina. On the contrary, this seems to support Rabbi Chanina. Because what was Rabbi Chanina's point? That if he does an avera for which, as a benoach, he'd be chayv sayif, but now it's after gerus, he's a new person, right? He has a new status, and a new misa, right? A new misa. Well, again, we're going to see in the Gemara that he's chayv sayif. Okay, fine. So the din is that he's potter. Why? Because we cannot implement and judge him as what? As a ben-noach, because he's no longer ben-noach. So far, so good. But now we read the next part of the Bryce. Asa came to Israel. So what happened now? A ben-noach kills a Jew. It sounds like contemporary news, right? Oh, or perhaps Baal Eshes Ish Mi Yisrael. Okay, so now he has a relationship with a Jewish woman who's married. And then with this guy, Chayav. All of a sudden, the Brisa tells us in the Sefer that he's Chayav. So the Gemara says the following: V'amai, name a whole the Ishtane. According to Reb Chanina, he's no longer a guy, and now you want to condemn him as Yisrael. He's changed his whole status. Now we need a bezdin of 23 judges. We need a hasra. We need two edim. So the Gemara answers, Dino umisaso be'ina. Let's judge as to whether or not his bisa has changed. Vahai, although I have to admit, Dino ishtani, he is no longer subject to the din of ben Noach of one judge, one aid, and without asra. But nevertheless, misaso lo ishtani. His misa has not changed. And if you take a look here, he says, misaso lo ishtani, sug ha-misa shu chayav al masim elu she'asik sh'agoy lo ishtana. V'nei shegam im hoya osa zos ki Yehudi, hoya v'schayav pi oso misa. And we'll see how the Gemara works this out in just a second. And therefore, if the same misa applies now as a Yisrael, had he committed the crime after Gerus, he would be condemned for that crime with the same exact misa. It's not enough of hoil the ishtane ish. So let's work it out. Bishleim, I understand, Rotseach, Meikara, as a guy, is beside. He bechayev saif. Now let's say he committed murder as a Yisrael, is hashta saif. Now too, he's chayev saif. So what's the punishment for killing a Yisrael? Saif. So the punishment for murder is saif. Now it doesn't matter whether he's a ben Noach or he's a ben Yisrael. In both cases, even after Gerus, he would be chayev saif. And therefore, we can understand very well that Asa can't be Yisrael, Vinis Gayer, Chayav, in the case of what? In the case of Ritzicha. But keep in mind that the Sefer the Brisa is Ola on two different criminal acts. One is Ritzicha, and the other is Baal Eshes. And now we have a problem, because how could you say he's Chayav now as a Ger? After all, now we have not only Ishtani Dina, but we also have Ishtani Misasa. Why? Ela Eshes May Kara, if he would have been a god, is Sayev the Hashta. But now, if he would be a Yisrael and commit the same Avera of Baal Eshes, he'd be Chayev Chenek. Now, Chenek is Kal compared to Sayev, correct? So remember I told you we charted this all out. I don't know if you were able to see my photograph. I don't think it came out. But anyway, so Ben Noach Shebal Eshes Ish Yisrael. So if he's a Ben Noach and he had this relationship with an Eshes Ish Yisrael, he's Chayev Chayev. But after Gerus, as a Yisrael who's Baal Eshes Ish, he's only Chayev Chenek. What does that mean? Chenek relative to Sayev is Kal. At least
according to all of that.
What do you say?
Is that according to all of that?
I don't know. We're going to see later on. The Gemara is going to go through all the different permutations, comparing this misa to the other. But right now, for our purposes, the Gemara is assuming that the misa that we would have meted out to him as a ger, had he done the same crime, would be a misa kala relative to the misa that he would get as a ben noach, namely sayif, because chedek is kal vis-a-vis sayif. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to introduce another situation here.
So far, the Gemara hasn't explained what difference does it make if he kills a guy or a Jew, or if he has a relationship with the wife of a Jew or the wife of a guy.
Right. The issue here
Is
is
that factor, we don't know why that's relevant. We know why that affects the halacha.
I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying.
Jew kills a guy, he's not going to be time missing.
right. Is
the price
is that what you're talking about, David? I don't know if that was.
No, I'm saying that the price is the mechalik between a guy who kills a guy and a guy who kills a Jew. I'm saying the Gemara at this point has not addressed why that.
No, there's no difference now he's a guy, but there's a difference.
Right, the
when
price
it comes
is
to
mechalik who he kills or who he sleeps with.
Because they make a huge difference, because when he's a Jew, he's still time. When he's a Jew, he's not time, he means God.
No, in both
No,
cases,
right,
killing.
who
No,
he
no, no,
kills
in
or
the
who
first
he
case,
sleeps with.
in the first case, he commits adultery with a guy. And if he's a Jew, he's nothing. I mean, it's not
I'm
that.
talking about who he killed, the victim.
Yeah, the victim.
I think
Makes a huge difference.
why?
Because if the victim is a guy and a Jew kills a guy, he's not time missing. Not mask, he's not going to be time. Doesn't have missing. So now as a gay, he's not time anything. He's not going to give the word.
I just
No,
want
there's
to.
three
I just
levels.
want to
There's three
finish
levels.
the
Killing a
sugya,
goy.
just a push-up shot in the sugya. Is that all right?
Killing
So the Gemara attempts at an answer here, and he says benara murasa. Now here's an interesting case of a ben noach who had a relationship with a nara hamurasa.
That's an error, let's have skiva instead of that.
Oh, the idi v'skila. The Gemara is trying to set up a situation
The guy is also.
where the guy also would get the misa chamura exactly as he was a guy, meaning the gerus doesn't change his misa. In other words, let's interpret the brisa when it says "Asa came be Israel" as referring to a nara murasa, and the halacha is that if a ben noach has a relation with a nara murasa, he's chayav skila. That's so far the only exception to the rule of sayev, and he's chayav skila. And now, had he implemented the same crime as Yisrael, meaning Baal nara murasa, he would also be chayav skila. So there's no ishtani misa, and that's why the brisa paskins, even in the light of Rabbi Chanina's principle of hova ishtane, that he's chayav. So the Gemara says that's an impossible interpretation of the brisa for a technical reason. Va'asa came be Israel, dumya de eishes chavera ketani. In other words, the brisa and the reisha and the seif have to be talking about the same case. And in the reisha, we were talking about a ben noach shabal eishes chavero, and therefore the seif we're going to talk about ben noach shabal al eishes Yisrael. But we're not going to have the luxury of introducing here nara murasa. Ella. Okay, now
There's no erison by Goyim?
no, there's only beer by right? Babulas Pal. So now we finally get to the Gemara's answer. This Ella is going to reconcile Rabbi Chanina's principle with the seifa of this brisa that Asa can't be Yisrael chayav, even though we said before that there's a difference here between Ritzicha and Baal Eishesish. In Ritzicha, it's always going to be Saif. Whether or not he was a guy who killed someone or a Yisrael who killed someone, it's always going to be what? Misas Saif. So Benoch Shikas Yisrael, Lo Nishtana Misasa. And therefore, Reb Chanina doesn't apply. But that part is the part we understand. The part we don't understand is the part of Baal Eishes Yisrael. Why? Because when a guy has a relationship with an Eishes Yisrael, so what did we say was his Misa was Saif, correct?
Right.
But in a case where a Ger has a relationship with an Eishes Yisrael, it's a different Misa entirely. It's a different Misa of Chenek.
Right.
But what did we say before? Chenek is Kal vis-a-vis Saif. So the Gemara says, Ella, here's how I can reconcile Rabbi Chanina. Kala v'chambura meshech shaycha. Now, what does that mean? Kala v'chambura meshech shaycha. So let's take a look at Rashi, and then we'll look at Tosfos. Rashi says the following. It's the third of the wide lines. Flomar, Leolam Beishis each. Forget about Nara Uros. And now we went from Saif down to Chenek as Yisrael. Udiko Kashlach Amai Chayev Harinish Tanadino Misoso. Ain't got Shidi Misa. There's no Shidi Misa here. Why? The Yesh Bechlal Misa Chamura Bisa Kala. Included in Saif is Chenek. In other words, Saif is Chenek plus. You follow? Like Yesh Bechlal Masai Mana kind of thing. The Keva the Mikari Havi Saif de Chabira Vahashta Misas Chenek Kala is therefore, says Rashi, Bechlal Misa Zuhava, included in Misa Saif is Chenek. We have to add something to Saif in order to reach the level of Chenek. Meaning now after Gerus, he would be chayiv not only the Misa Kal of what? Of Saif, he'd be chayiv a Misa Chamura of Chenek.
Wait, Chenek?
No.
Backwards.
Did I get it right?
Backwards.
I messed it around? Again, as a Ben Noach, he would be chayiv a Misa Chamura of Saif,
Right.
and now he goes down to a Misa Kal of Chenek. Avol Birchas Hashem. Now we go back to our chart. In Birchas Hashem, we said that as Ben Noach is chayiv Saif. But as Yisrael, for Birchas Hashem is chayiv on Misa Chamura. Namely what? Skila. So Rashi said, Al Birchas Hashem meikara v'sayiv kal, v'hashta skila chamura. So you can't tell me that by implementing the Misa of today, you would have implemented the Misa of Ben Noach, because Ben Noach would be chayiv only Saif, and now you want to extend his Misa and give him a more severe Misa by stretching from Saif all the way up to what? To Skila. Now, if you take a look at Tosfos, again, we're going to leave out the first half of Tosfos for a little bit later, but Tosfos Timaskel Kala with a kuf, okay, not the Naram Rasa that we spoke about before. But anyway, Vinira Lefarish, see if you can find that. It's about 10 lines up from the bottom of Tosfos, maybe a little bit more. Vinira Lefarish, Hoda Kamar Kala B'Chamura Meshach Shaicha, Lav Lemeimar Delo Choshiv Ishtene Ktola. Don't take the Gemara literally, as if to say that it's not a different Misa. It certainly is a different Misa. We're going from the Misa of Saif to the Misa of what? Yeah. Of Chenek. Those are two different Misas. So you can't take the Gemara literally and say, well, it's lo Ishtani Misa. It is Ishtani Misa. But what's the Meshach Shaichi? But to become a Tolishne, Ella, Klomar, Islam Lemidaine Bekala, we can actually implement the punishment of Baal Ashes Yisrael for a guy, which would be what? Saif, which is Kala. Just 1 second, I'm sorry. Just forget it. We can actually implement the punishment as if he had implemented the crime now as a ger. And what would be that punishment as a ger? It would be chenek. And why? Keva to be karan is chayiv af bechamura mizu. He's already included in that misa of what? Of chenek. Why? Because skila, because saif is more common than what? Than chenek. The lo dami leben noach shabirachas Hashem. The lo dainina b'misa dahashta. Why? Because the misa dahashta, if he was mevarachas Hashem, would be what? Skila. And that's a skila. That's a misa chambura de meikara in comparison to the misa of saif. Is lo chayiv be. He was never chayiv the misa chambura. So I can implement the misa of hashta as long as it's included in the misa de meikara. So that's a whole new pshat. It's no longer lo ishtene. It is ishtene. Tosfos admits that there's a change in the misa, and the change in the misa went just like in the case of Birachas Hashem from Saif to Skila. So too, even in the case of Ben Noach Shabal Eishasish Yisrael, there is a shinu in the misa from Saif to Chenek, but the difference is as follows: that if you want to implement today's misa, for example, In the case of Birchas Hashem, today's Misa as a ger would be what? Would be skila. That's a Misa Chamura. We cannot impose that Misa on whom? On a crime that was committed as a Ben Noach, when he would be incurring a chiyuv of what? Of Sayef, which is Kal. But in the other way around, if he was Baal Shasish today as a ger, he would only be chayiv what? Be chayiv chenek, which is Kal vis-a-vis the Misa that he would have incurred as what? As a Ben Noach Baal Shasish, namely the Misa of Sayef. So we can say that included in the Misa of Sayef is the Misa of Chenek. So we've covered both. Do you see where the Yonafshach falls at? What we say that's what I wanted to point out here, that the whole thrust of Reb Chanina of whole Ishnei Ishti might be the following, that we are sort of, falling between the cracks over here, because if we want to implement the Misa of today, that's more Chomer. If we want the Misa of yesterday, which is Kal, but the problem is that he's no longer in that state of being. He's no longer a Ben Noach. So he's not subject to the Misa of a Ben Noach. But what would be in the case, remember, of Ritzicha, where we said that if he had killed this Yisrael as a Goy, he'd be Chayiv Sayef. If he had killed this Yisrael after Geras, he'd be Chayiv Sayef. And it's the same exact Misa. Then we don't say whole Ishtadei because it's the same Misa. And now the Gemara is adding another possibility of it's the same Misa. Why? Because Meshach Shaykh. What's the language of the Gemara? Let's go over it again. The Gemara says that Kala B'Chamura Meshach Shaykha. What does that mean? That means that when we look at the Kala, right, with the Kula effect of Kala, and we compare it to the original Misa Ben Noach, then it's Meshach Shaykha. What does Tosfos say Meshach Shaykha? It's really a Misa that we really would condemn the Ben Noach. Just that in the case of Ben Noach, he deserves a worse Misa. Yeah, it's a very paradoxical situation. Why a Yisrael who's Paul? We're not now writing the Rambam's for Nevuchim, but we are Nevuchim now. But that's what the din is. The din is that Yisrael Shabal is Chayiv Chenek. Again, I don't know if it's pleasant, but relative to Sayiv, it's considered Kala, and therefore we don't have to be Monavshach anymore. Now we have the opposite be Monavshach. That no matter how you slice the cake, by implementing the Misa of Chenek, everything is fine because be Monavshach. Either you want to treat him as a Yisrael, you be Chayiv Chenek. If you want to treat him as Ben Noach, he's also be Chayiv Chenek. Ella what? He be Chayiv Chenek plus in order to bridge the gap to Sayed. And now we can implement the Misa of Chenek because that's included in the Misa of Sayed. That's the Mesa of Sayed.
You need to have two changes. The one change is the guy himself. He was a goy, and now he's a Jew.
That we have.
And you also have to have another change, which is the change in the din.
Right.
That then he was chayav, he would have been chayav.
Right. But I just want to, if I cut you off just a second, Ellie, I'm objecting to the word din because it's just going to confuse us. Instead of din, use the word misa. I'll tell you why. Because when the Gemara used the word din, it doesn't mean what you meant. The Gemara used the word din in terms of the system of evidence and the judgment and the condemnation. But anyway, we need a double shinui in order to apply ishtar ishti. Number one, the dinim have changed.
Right.
And number two, the misa has changed as well.
So in the case where if he's where he'd be chayav as a goy, side, but as a Jew he'd be chayav in chenek. So the Havamina is no, that's holy ishtar. So it's different. We're not gonna be.
It's a different misa.
But now
and therefore, Chanina's principle should kick in. It's both ishtarei dina and ishtarei misasa, and therefore, how can you condemn to death?
So the answer is what? So
it's only ishtarei dina, but it's not ishtarei misasa. Why? Because included in sayef is chenek. It's like there's a shadow in the sayef that hides the chenek. The chenek lurks in the background of the sayef. There's an inherent chiyuv chenek in the condemnation for sayef, because when Bezdin is going to condemn him, they're going to condemn him for the lower punishments and the upper punishments. I mean, for this, we probably have to learn all of Elu Naris, and give like the Rabbi and all
But
those
if
things.
you want to use a previous thing of jurisdiction, the court doesn't have now the jurisdiction to kill the Ben Sora Mara who's changed because Hakiv is finite. So you can say the jurisdiction of Saif is up to Saif. So therefore Chenek is included in it, and therefore they can implement
See, I'm just worried about one thing here. Rashi implements the principle of the Tzilu Ha'ed. And I said before that Vitzilu Ha'ed allows you to come up with the weakest kind of justification to let him off the hook. And I would say that the Havamid of the Gemara is in Rashi's reference is more convincing, more compelling than this Maskana. Because the Havamid is the Shini of Misa. You got to admit this, the Shini of Misa. This Tana Misasa. So you can trade with a thumb here and there.
That way
Rashi has to undermine the principle of Vitzilu Ha'ed.
Sure, Yesh Mechal Masayman. If it's more common, so there was pieces included.
That is that why Rashi says like Chenek is, but Tosfot wouldn't accept that. Like Tosfot, that's why Tosfot is.
Yeah, Rashi's sort of going too far over here.
Your difference between each
Tosfos
Tana.
wants to say that there's something sort of in the background. There's some sort of like potential chiyuv chenek here when we condemn him for side.
Also, then, if with the Yid, if you gave Asra to him and told him it's Saif, then the Basin should be able to kill him in Chenek because.
Yeah, let's say again, I'm not posketing
Right.
here, but it would seem that if let's say there was no possibility, well, that's a different thing. Because the Gemara has drushes that we could kill him with any BC. You can even shoot him with an arrow.
So
Okay.
what would it
All right.
nafka maybe between Rashi and Tosfot on how they understand?
I don't
Masechet.
have enough Gemina, but I do
You because
think,
you said that lo ishtane is Rashi, it didn't change,
yeah,
and Rashi and Tosfot says it did change, but we still do it. We still have the jurisdiction.
right, because again, Tosfos is operating with this logical approach
Of jurisdiction.
we're compelled to let him off the hook, and here we're not compelled to let him off the hook because we're giving him what he deserves and even less than what he deserves. But in Rashi's frame of reference, where it's Vitzilu Ha'ed is like, let's find the technical loophole here, not something that's logically compelling, and is a p'tur, then why shouldn't there be a p'tur from Chenek insofar as his original chiyuv at the time that he implemented the crime was a chiyuv saif? Do you follow what I mean?
Right, and therefore Rashi has to say Saif equals Chenek, and Saif equals Cherek, and Saif equals
I
Saif.
guess, yeah. Yesh
I mean, he's-
b'chlal misa chamura misa kala. That's
It's
the portion of
within
Rashi.
that's the definition of Saif. Saif includes every punishment, whereas Tosfot says we still have jurisdiction, but it's not the same punishment. Okay.
Okay, so where are we up to now? We up to Lema Misayele?
Yes.
Oh, wait a second.
I need-
Oh, no, now
Ani Chadraba.
now the Gemara is going to go through a whole business about what's more chamur, which misa is more chamura. Just 1 second. Some Saif chamur, Reb Shimon, that holds that Chenek is more chamur than Saif Ma'ikal of Meimar. Reb Shimon Sorah Ketanet Ve'Menashia.
Mm.
They called Misa Abura Lepnei Noach Eina Ela Chenek. So the Gemara says that if you want to square this with Rabbi Shimon, who holds that actually Saif is more chamur than Chenek, and now you want to punish him with Chenek, you're going to have to say that all of Ben Noach, like Rabbi Nasha, is a chiyuv of Chenek. So it goes from Chenek to Chenek, and it's the same thing as Ritzicha, which goes from Saif to Saif. Okay. Oh, now the Gemara goes on. I'm just trying to get to the Lema Sayele. Let's see, Bishlema, Eshes Ishmei Kara, Chenek Vahashta, Chenek. Just 1 second. El Rotseach. Now the Gemara is going to have trouble with the Bnei Menashe because Bnei Menashe now switched the whole thing around. It's no longer that Ben Noach is chayiv what? Saif. Instead, he's chayiv Chenek in all Sheva Mitzvah. So in Eshes Ish, everything works out well because as Yisrael is chayiv Chenek, so it's the same Misa. But now, in the case of Ritzicha, this is going very strange because a Jew kills or murders someone is chayiv Saif, and in the case of what? In the case of Ben Noach, according to Rabbi Menashe, he's going to be chayiv what? Chenek, correct? And what happens now? Oh, so now we're going to compare Saif to Chenek, and we're going to go back to the original answer of Meshach Shayach because we're going to assume that that Saif is more Chomer than Chenek, correct? Okay, fine. Lema Messiah. This is what I wanted to get to. All right, Rabosai, you ready for this? I'm telling you, this is a doozy of a sugya. All right, Lema Messiah. We want to bring a raya for Rabbi Chanina. Okay, he says here that we're going to try to prove that Nishtana Misa is then Donim es Hanidon b'Misa shel Achshav. Okay, this is Rashi, and I told you I owe you one as far as Rashi is concerned. This is the Rashi. Remember we spoke about this here last week about the Hashta as opposed to Meikara. You remember that Rashi? All right. Anyway, so what happens now in the Bryce? Now again, if I'm going to go back to my chart for a moment. Here's the deal. If Yisrael is Ba al Naira Hamurasa, then he's Chayav Skila. However, if on the other hand she's a Bogeres, then the Chayav is Chenek. So it's really interesting that the Torah sees a Naira Hamurasa as more Chamur than a Bogeres. I mean, again, that's for the more Nevuchim, but whatever it is. So again, so what are we saying now? A Yisrael had a relationship with the Naira Murasa, correct? So what's his chiyuv? Skila. You have that? Again, you have to write this down, I think, at least at my age. Okay, Skila. Now, she became a Bogeres. So we were not able to condemn them for the crime within that 6-month period, and she already became what? A Bogeres. Now, if we would condemn them for that same Ashes Ish relationship now as a Bogeres, what would be the punishment? It would go down to Chenek. So what would you say in this case before we plunge into the Gemara itself? Would there be a Ptur or a Chiyuv? Right, again, there'd be a Chiyuv, correct? Why? Because Kal b'Chabura Meshet Shaykh.
Go down.
Okay, so let's see it inside. Okay, so we were not able to judge her and condemn her as a naira for the Misa of Skila, correct? And now, when we get a hold of her, she's already a Bogeres, and if the crime would have been committed today as a Bogeres, we would go down to Chenek. So Gemara says the following. Beskila, my time low. Just 1 second, I missed something here. Oh, Tidon Bechenek. I'm sorry, I missed the 2 words here, 2 critical words. Is Tidon Bechenek? What's the Misa that's appropriate for now as a Bogeres? Chenek. Right? So Tidon Bechenek. And the question is, wait a minute, when was the crime perpetrated? When she was Chayav Chenek as a Nara, correct? So Skila, I'm sorry, right? Skila,
Right.
Is with Skila my time low? La mishuk the whole Vishnei, right? It's a different visa, but now I can understand. I can understand condemning her with Chenek as a Bogeres. Why? Because it's not going to be Ishtane. The Koshkein Hacha. Oh, okay, fine. So. Let's wait a minute until we get to Kolshkein Hach, because that's going to go back to the original statement of Rabbi Chanina. But let's just understand this brisa based on what we understand of Rabbi Chanina. We understood from Chanina that we could punish this person with the original punishment if now the same punishment exists, or alternatively, if the punishment of now could be included. Because it's what? It's less chamor than the original punishment. You with me? Less chamor. Today is less chamor than that. Am I right? Yeah. Sometimes I make mistakes here, so you have to correct me, right? You're the watchdogs here. So the Gemara says now I have a proof for Rabbi Chanina. Why? The Kolshkein Hacha. So what's the case of Rabbi Chanina? A Ben Noach Shabiras Hashem, which means he's Chayav Sayef. Now. He was misgayer, and therefore he's only chayav. Then he's chayav a visa chamura, namely skila. The ishnei legamre. So now we understand very well why, in the case of Rabbi Chanina, of Benoach Shebirchas Hashem, v'achkach this Gayer, why we cannot implement the visa of Skila, because whole Ishtadei Ishtadei, right? Originally he would be Chayiv only Sayef, and now you're going to impose Skila, and the same logic is going to apply in this case of what? Of Yisrael Shebal Naram Brasa Vidis Bagra, that what? That, just one second, that Tidon Mechenik. So why can't we condemn them now to what? To just 1 second. No, 1 second. We're gonna understand the skila my time. Why can't we condemn them as the crime was committed bismano meikara, meaning what? Skila. That we can't do because now if she's Bogeres and the Misa would be only what? Only Chenek. So we can't do that. That's really Nishtana Misasa. We cannot give him a Misa Chamura when if the crime was implemented now, he would only get a Misa Kala. But we're adding the other part to this Brisa, right? I think we did even better than the Gemara. What do I mean? That in a case where we want to impose a chiv chenek, that's what it says tidon bechenek. Why? Because the original misa would have been a misa chabura, namely what? Skila. Now it's only a misa kal of chenek. Then it's included on the skila. And if it's included on the skila, like we said before, that chenek was included in what? In sayef. Now we're saying that chenek is included in skila. What do you say? It's not a study visa.
So Shana just means worse, it doesn't mean change.
No, he wants to say that means change.
Well, yeah, that's what we tried to show from Tosfos. That's not really a change.
Yes,
Included.
Okay, so now at this point, we're finished with Rabbi Chanina.
But what's the koshki in Hakada? In Rabbi Chanina's case of the guy who was referred as a change. What is Ishtana the Gamri?
Just 1 second. Yeah, because it's not only Ishtana Misaso, but it's also, right? It's not only Ishtana Misaso because it went to a Misa Chambura as a ger, but it's also Ishtana Din. And now the Gemara says, well, thank you, Rabbi Chanina, but Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. And now at this point, when we finally finish the whole sugya, the Gemara is going to turn everything upside down. And Rabbi Chanina is going to change the girsa in the brisa, and Rabbi Yochanan, I mean to say, and instead of saying Tidon bechenek, tni Tidon beskila. Whoa! What do you mean Tidon beskila? You mean now she's a bogeres? No, I'm sorry. At the time of the crime, she was what? A nara, and what's the punishment for a nara? Skila, and we're going to punish with the original punishment. The whole business falls by the wayside. I'm not a happy camper.
That actually makes sense.
We work very hard.
But why not judge them for what they did? That's more intuitive.
Even though right now the status is totally different.
You judge them for what they did.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter than now.
All right, we're gonna have to get into this. How are we doing on the clock? Because I have something to tell you. What? Not doing too well. All right, so let's leave it at this. Well, I want to give you the following assignment. Okay, I want you to go through Tidon Beskila with the footnote here on the bottom, Chaf Aleph. Do you see that on the right side? That's number one. And what else? Can you write this down just to save me, that little extra effort, okay? I want you to take a look at the following marmakomas. First of all, Rashi Tido Beskila. You have it? Tido Beskila is 5 lines up from the bottom. If somebody could write this up for the group. Okay, Rashi Tido Beskila. Number 2, I want to see 2 Rambams. One Rambam is in the 10th parak of Hilchos Malachim. And we're going to try to determine who does the Rambam paskin like. And in Perek Yud, Milchus Malachim Halacha Dalid, you'll decide, that's your homework assignment, who he paskins like between Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yochanan. Then, to turn everything upside down, we're going to look at another Rambam. Again, Perek Yud, Milchus Malachim, that's 10. Halacha Dalid is 4. 10, 4. And then we're going to look at Hilchos Isurei Bia. And we're going to try to figure out the case of Nara and Bogeres, where he had a relationship with a married woman who was a Nara, and then before we got to the Gemara Din, she became a Bogeres. That's in Hilchos Isurei Bia, Perek Gimel, Halacha Yud. And all of these sources are quoted, if you want to take a look, in what's called the Yalkut Bi'urim. So you can, that's just if you want to see that. And what is a week from tonight is Motzei Purim here in Efrat. No, we're not in Efrat. We're in Alon Shvut. To have the same status as Efrat, correct?
I don't think we'll be in a condition for cheer.
I don't think so. I don't think so. So I will see you in Mirz Hashem in 2 weeks' time.
Wow.
Adkan.
Thank you very much.
Okay, it's a doozy, I'm telling you. Rabbi Beasley, we had a few easier sugis, so don't lose. Very good. I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted. Freilichen Purim. As my father-in-law would say, may rest in peace. Pirim, pirim, pirim lanu, bachar b'Hashem, bachar bonu, pirim lanu, baruch Hashem, bachar bonu. And he was already the sume. He never got drunk though. I don't know. He could drink a ton, and he never got drunk.
How you doing?
I should make a shiva call. It's too late, probably. Yeah.
I don't know.
It's Atara died. I only met her once. She was very peeved.
Oh, no.
I thought I was telling her something that would bring a smile to her face, and she got angry. What happened was, I was on a bus back from Boston. We used to go for the summers to learn with the Rav in Boston. And I see 2 yeshiva guys getting on a bus in Boston. That's like really rare. So I got into shmooze with them. And I said, what brings you to Boston? They said, well, in Lakewood Yeshiva during Bein Asmanim, they ask us if we volunteer to go out and collect money. So I said to them, how'd you do in the city of Boston? So they go, except for one check. Who was the check? Rabbi Soloveitch. So I said, can you tell me a story? So these 2 Lakewood guys tell me the following story. They knocked on the door, the Chorskys, and Rabbi Chorsky, Professor Chorsky comes to the door, and he says, I can't disturb my father-in-law. He's upstairs and he's resting. So they turn to leave, and then they hear a voice. Tell the boys to wait for me. I'm coming down the steps. So the Rav came down. He sat with these boys for a long time. He asked about Rav Shneur Kotler, about the yeshiva. He was interested. And they walked out with the best check in the city of Boston. So I told this Tatara, may she rest in peace. She got very upset. Why? Because Lakewood did not send a representative to the Rav's funeral. And she was really peeved. What?
Very young.
Maybe that's the answer. I don't know. I want to be down the Kavskos. But here I thought I was, his comment was schwach, and it turned out that she got angry. Anyway. So I had a story with Tova, but that was a whole different story. Rabbi Shapiro, David Shapiro. So he published a book called, based on the Rav's Torah. It's called Pesach, Shavuos, and the Sfis. It's a magnificent piece of work. And if David Shapiro,
the green book, right?
The green one, the green cover. And if you know David Shapiro, I don't have to tell you, he's a perfectionist. He worked like crazy on that book. So I once said to David, David, we should take the Shiurim L'Zecher Hamarit, it's 2 volumes of the Rav's Yard Shurim, and do the same job, exactly what you did. So he says to me, "You do it." He says to me, "I'm not doing it," because he was working on his Rebby, Professor Chorsky stuff. So he said to, so I said to him, "All right, I'll try to see if I can do it." So he says, "But you have to get permission from the family." So I don't remember if he set up the
Publish it, not to transfer.
yeah, no, to publish. I wanted to publish it as a contribution. I wasn't going to make a dime from it. So we called up the Lichtensteins, and I told Rabban what it was about. So he said he wants his wife to be on the phone, and they both got on the phone, and I explained what it was, and they said, "Go for it." They said, "We trust you. You know how to present the Rav Torah." So I got a vote of confidence from Tova. I don't think she would remember that.
And wait for the books. It's the end of the story.
Yeah, I never did it.
It's called.
I got the okay,
It's called time.
There's 100 spots, at some point. Yeah. I once went to a chassan of a friend of mine who was separate seating for men and women. So I see after the chuppah, Tov was walking out. So I said, "Mrs. Lichtenstein, we just had the chuppah." She says, "I'm going home to have dinner with my husband." She says, she wasn't a big fan of separate seating. Oh no, she said, "I'm going home to have dinner with Aaron." She said, then I once called up the Chwerskis just to ask if Moshe Chwersky Shalom is coming. So Atara says to me, "He's going to Israel, and we didn't publicize it in the radio." She says, "A Brisker could say such." I see even in the women that Brisker. All right, guys, have a great week. Welcome for.